Welcome to Halftime. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a halftime alumni from Greenville, South Carolina in the USA. This is our 52nd halftime webinar event. I can't believe we've done so many. And we appreciate so much that you've joined us tonight. Now, Halftime is the world's leading peer learning center for successful people who are in transition. We teach, coach, and connect leaders who are looking for more meaning, joy, and impact in their next season. Now, I think you're really going to enjoy today's event. Persistence, positioning yourself for lifelong impact. Now, we are also joined by Lloyd Reeb, Halftime Institute's founding partner. And I want to bring Lloyd up here on the screen. Welcome, Lloyd. I think it's fantastic that we're focusing on aspects of lifelong impact. How would you define persistence, though?
Well, like you say, lifelong impact. And in my view, it's a combination of long-term intentionality without insisting on control. You know, Doug, you and I can't control a thing. And we've talked about our adult kids and the changes happening in their lives over the last decade or so that we've been friends. And obviously the economy is changing and our ministries evolve over time. And how do you and I stay intentional at discovering and pursuing God's call and living it out at the same time without insisting on control? And so it's this delicate tension that you saw in Jesus' life where he had a clear sense of purpose and a strategy to execute on it. But every day he got up and he was responding spontaneously to the needs of people around him. And he was on his knees early in the morning, it says, before daybreak, and in prayer with his Father, seeking direction for the day. And he persisted. And so this is what you and I are longing for, is to be intentionally pursuing long-term intentionality without insisting on control. Part of it, includes grit, like we learned, and stick-to-itiveness. And part of it is a systematic way to wake up each day and each week and each year with a renewed sense of purpose and stewardship of our lives.
So one of the things I observed during the summer as I contemplated next year is there seems like there are people who are just thriving in their second half. They're just into what they're doing. They're exciting. It gives them energy. And then you see others that are just, I would guess the word would be wandering. They're trying some low-cost probes. They're frustrated. They're disappointed. They may have fallen into old habits. What are you seeing as you coach? You coach lots of people, and you see those that are thriving and then those that are struggling. What's the secret?
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, Doug, that's something that I take to heart because I want to finish strong. And I was looking through all the files recently of folks that I've coached a long time ago. And first of all, one thing that stood out to me is that some of them have passed away. And their opportunity to live their destiny, or live their calling or purpose has come to an end. Others, I sense that they told me what they wanted in the long term in their life, and I don't see those elements in their life today. And then there are some, like you said, that they're just filled with joy and vision around something that they know to be their purpose. They know it's something they were put on this planet to do. And it's as if it just infuses the rest of their life with energy and focus, and it helps them avoid getting sloppy busy. Sloppy busy is when your calendar is full, but it's not necessarily feeling fulfilling or focused or leveraged. So that's been an important topic for me in observing people's lives over these many years. And now that you and I have a little bit of gray hair, or a lot of gray hair, I think we can talk about persistence with a different perspective than we could have 20 years ago. And so this is kind of an inside conversation for for halftime alumni who really want to finish strong. And let's just call it the topic of persistence. And when I think about this halftime journey at the highest level, I think about 5 words that start with P. On the far left is purpose. You start the halftime journey wondering, what is my purpose for this next season in my life? And then with purpose in mind, if you gain a bit of clarity around your purpose, you can start to design your platform. What organization or what organizations, and how much structure do I need, and what role will I play? Important conversations with organizations around how you could live this purpose out on this platform. And then in order to really make this a life of impact and meaning, we've got to stop and say, okay, let's talk about the people around me. Those people that you want to love extravagantly, those people you need on your team, you need around you in order to finish well. And then because we've been blessed, and many of us have excess, we start to think about philanthropy and posterity. How will I pass the values down before I pass down money to the next generation? And how can I use the excess finances I have in effective philanthropy? What's the difference between just writing checks and actually producing results? Giving is not a result. It's an input, not an output. And then lastly, persistence. So if I have clarity on my purpose, if I've designed a platform that fits me, if I have thought through how to love the people around me extravagantly and be surrounded by people that can help me live out my calling, if I have a plan for philanthropy and passing the values down and creating posterity in my family, living a legacy, then how will I stick with it? How will I persist? So over these years, in my observation, there are 5 major factors and rank ordered in importance. In other words, the first ones that you and I will talk about are the most important. And there are 5 that stand out to us from observation, but it doesn't mean those are the only 5 elements of persistence, but those are certainly ones that have been overwhelmingly evident in the lives of people who are finishing well. In fact, in the summers a few years ago, Jim Collins and Bob Buford and I and others created an event each summer called Finishing Great. And in preparing for that, I pulled out all the files of people I had coached 15 years or 10 years before and asked myself who's finishing well and who's not, based on their own written answers to what a great life would look like. And so here are the things that stood out. And Doug, let's just talk through these together and how you and I are trying to live these out, but also how we see some of the many halftime alumni that we interact with living them out. The very first and most important component to persistence in our observation is knowing your calling, taking the time and effort to get clear on your purpose and calling, as opposed to just volunteerism. There's a huge difference between a purpose or a destiny and just getting busy with some volunteerism or some ministry that seems good. Like the French poet once wrote, that when you discover your destiny, if you don't follow it, it follows you like an accusing shadow. And the question is, what are you and I doing that we can't not do? And so I remember a Chinese pastor saying to me once that, remember, Lloyd, he said, your calling is a gift to receive, not a goal to achieve. And so the question is your calling really clear? And if it is like a keel in a sailboat. You know, in my sailboat, if it didn't have a keel, when I'm out on the lake here and the wind comes across the bow, my boat is just going to drift from side to side in the lake and bang into things. But with a keel, when the wind blows across the bow of my boat, it pushes the boat forward. And when you encounter challenges, as you will, as you're living out your purpose in this next season, if you know your calling, it will give you the ability to stay in the game, to really persist. You know, we were talking earlier, Doug, and you had a verse that came to mind that really makes this idea of persistence and calling come alive. Share that with us if you don't mind, and we'll just take a second and look at the 2 or 3 components of it that that were just so clear and compelling to us in our earlier conversation.
Galatians 6, 9 through 10. So let's not allow ourselves to get fatigued doing good. At the right time, we will harvest a good crop if we don't quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get the chance, let's work for the benefit of all with people closest to us in a community of faith.
Yeah, wow, that's packed with these ideas that we're going to unpack today. So what stood out to you in that, Doug, to start with?
You know, the thing that I found most interesting was don't allow yourself to get fatigued. It's a different perspective. We look at fatigue a lot of times as something that happens to us. This verse implies that we need to be proactive and not allow ourselves to get fatigued, which I think goes into getting enough sleep and taking care of our health and exercising. How would you interpret that part?
Yeah, I mean, those are factors, and your health is one of the big five that we've observed, right? To the degree that it's in your control to focus on staying well and healthy and getting the sleep and nutrition and silence and solitude, those disciplines of not allowing yourself to get fatigued. And also you notice how those verses go on to say, surround yourself with community of others, that encouragement. And I love that it says that in the right time, we will harvest a good crop. That's what persistence is about, is staying in the game, sticking with our calling, and over time, you're going to see it produce a crop. It's like being a good long-term investor. You buy something you consider to be a valuable investment, and you wait, and over time it compounds. This is exactly what I've seen in many, many people's lives, and certainly in my life over these last 28 years since I went through halftime. And it's about, positioning myself and having the disciplines in life to know my calling, and then the pieces around it that are important to stay in the game, and the crop develops in the right time. And so it goes on to say, if we don't give up or quit. And so what Doug and I want to try to help every halftime alumni do is to not allow themselves to get fatigued by having specific disciplines, knowing from others in history of what has helped people persist, and embedding those disciplines into our lives so that over time we will see our fruit compound. We will see a good crop multiply. And it reminds me of, Bob Buford's big focus on 100x return. And the 100x return happens not through a big burst of energy, but by staying in the game over time, allowing your impact to multiply. So the first thing in terms of persistence that we've learned through observation is get clear on your calling. And one way to do that is your mission statement, as you know from your experience in going through halftime. But there's another element to it, and that can help you get super clear on your calling, and that is what we call the T-shirt exercise. And I'm just going to hold mine up on the screen for a second for you to see, but really what you want to try to do is to distill your calling down so that it fits on a T-shirt. This was an exercise that Drucker asked Bob Buford to do, is to distill his calling down to a T-shirt, because then it is clear and memorable. And a T-shirt is a way of quickly communicating to somebody else one big idea. Mine's a drawing. It's a sigmoid curve with 100x at the top, where and a big star around it. I'm focused on being a thought leader, helping high-capacity marketplace leaders make 100x impact in their life. I'm looking for compounding returns. I have that drawing in a painting behind me here in my shelf. I pull it out and remind myself once in a while. So we're going to send that to you, that little T-shirt exercise. And our encouragement to you is to take an hour on a Saturday morning or a half hour and distill your mission down to a few words or a picture that fits on a T-shirt. And maybe if it's really compelling, get some T-shirts made to remind yourself. The second big thing is to surround yourself with sources of encouragement. Just like those verses said that you were just reading, Doug. And you've done that in part by staying connected with your cohort, your halftime cohort group. Talk a bit about what that looks like for you and how you get encouragement from them.
Our round table goes back 6 or 7 years ago now, and we continue to meet. We mostly do it by Zoom because we cover a big part of the state. But we continue to get together and actually are planning some get-togethers again later this year in person. We don't really sit down and have a Bible study. We really just sit down and enjoy hearing where everybody is in their journey and encouraging. It's a great time together, and the fellowship is fantastic. But what I like about it more than anything is when one of us faces a challenge, we can immediately all get together and weigh in on it and pray and work, and it's just a fantastic resource. Since that time, I've also kind of got involved in some other groups, some masterminds that have been formed in some area of interest, and that is a tremendous source of encouragement. So there's lots of ways to do it, and I highly recommend it.
So as a movement across the world, Halftime Institute is introducing an alumni connecting process that will build, it's an app that will make it easy for you to connect with people that are in your area of interest, in your city, struggling with something that you are. One of the mastermind groups, for example, that Doug's referring to is we created a mastermind group for halftime alumni who have a child that has failed to launch the way they were hoping they would. And it just came out of their conversation about what they wanted in the next season. They realized one of the big priorities was helping their child. When you think about surrounded by sources of encouragement, think about your own life. Here are some ideas to think about. One is create a personal board of directors. And we're going to send you tools on that. We also have a webinar that's just specifically dedicated to how you do it. But for me, that's 3 people that have been part of my life for 20, 25 years now, looking over my shoulder, reviewing my roadmap with me every December, giving me feedback. I have the feedback with me right here that I got from this last December. And I carry it with me because it's so valuable. And they bring wisdom, insight, perspective, a little bit of accountability. It's not so much about the past as they're helping me stay with my calling into the future, making it sustainable. Another is the discipline of capturing stories. And you might have heard of Bob's Book of Days. He encouraged me to do that 12 years ago. And so here's one of my Book of Days. It's an artifact every day. I try to keep an artifact every day of someone whose life I've had the privilege of being a blessing in. And I remember when he encouraged me to start with this discipline, I thought for sure there'd be nothing in this little black binder at the end of the year. He sent me a black spiral-bound notebook with a glue stick and scissors. And I just pulled this one off the shelf as Doug and I were beginning our conversation today. This is from 2014, and it's just filled from beginning to end with artifacts, real artifacts. There could be a voice message someone left or a book I inspired somebody to write, and I'll tear a page out from the front, or it could be a handwritten note they sent me, or a picture of me with someone whose life was changed. It's not about me. And every December I ask our kids to take a look at it and I remind them this is not a book of look at Lloyd go. This is a book of look at God go. And you could take a black marker and mark off everywhere my name is and cross it off, and it wouldn't change anything. It's a source, it's a discipline of encouragement. And celebrate the results. I've just written a new book called The Social Entrepreneur. It comes out this month, and I've got a young team that are around me helping to make the most of that book and the movement and the mentoring process we're creating. They're coming with their kids to our home, to the Lake Norman here in a few weeks to celebrate together. And it's a source of encouragement to me and to those around me to stay in the game. And then I use artifacts. If you were to sit where I am and look in through my study, just in front of me, I have a big sign that nobody else can see because it's inside the walls here of my study, and it just says Amazing Grace. It's not a reminder about God's amazing grace. It's a reminder about the movie Amazing Grace, which is about the life of William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was a leader in England and the United Kingdom in the 1800s and fought slavery for 30 years and eventually won, but he stuck with a movement that was against the economic interests of most of his peers. And how did he do it? Well, he was surrounded by a group of peers. William Pitt, the youngest prime minister of British history, was one of them, his childhood friend. Instead of just ending up out on his beautiful mansion, growing his garden and riding horses, he went in every day to Parliament and fought the good fight. And I have that as a reminder, a source of encouragement to me to stay in the game. I have an artifact here that I keep in the credenza in my study. It's in a museum box, and it is a 317-year-old Bible in the French language. My family was in France 317 years ago. And it's a reminder to me that the wisdom in this book is unchanging. You know, this book does not have a single rip in it. In other words, the person who owned this 317 years ago in France valued it. And this guy he rode a horse, first of all, probably carried a sword. And yet, the wisdom in that book I'm using every day to guide my life. And it's here as an encouragement to me to stay focused on the eternal ancient wisdom that's found in this book. So those are some things that I do that you could do. You'll come up with your own ways. Surround yourself with sources of encouragement. So Doug, let's go on. The third is really adaptability or flexibility, being willing to adapt and adjust as things change. Gosh, you and I didn't even know how to do these kind of live streams when you went through halftime, right? We didn't know much about them. And yet every year, we've been at this, 6 years now, every year you come up with innovative approaches, you keep changing things, and I'm like, dude, we got this figured out. Why are you changing? You're adapting, right? It's fun that I see you building out your parallel passion for beverage as a gourmet beverage expert around the world, and you use all your innovation and learning to help us keep adapting over here. What is that like for you? I mean, you're doing constant low-cost probes. You thought you were going to get past the low-cost probes.
No, I've learned, and of course I did business development for almost 40 years, so I learned you have to be adaptable. It's rare when you develop a product you really know what the market will accept. You have to adjust. And so, the low-cost probes are essential, and they're actually a joy because you try something new. If it doesn't go anywhere, nobody probably hardly sees it. And so you just keep trying. And then when they hit, they really are exciting. And that goes in my book of days. But you just have to be adaptable. I think it's crucial to be adaptable because if we don't, we're kind of stuck in our own ways. A friend of mine used to say, and he was referring to software, but I think it's very true about life. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. You can't stay in the middle. So you've got to keep moving forward, and whether it be software or technology or live stream.
So you know how they say you don't try to run a marathon, you train to run a marathon? And I think the same is true in adaptability. What we know from our culture and the language, at least in the English language, I know many of our halftime alumni are from other countries and speak different languages. But in America, we have two expressions about guys like you and I, men and women. One is stuck in your ways and grumpy old men. And, I don't want to become a grumpy old man or stuck in my ways, right? The Bible talks about the potter's field. It was the place where they threw the clay when it was no longer flexible enough for the potter to use them. I don't want my life to be so inflexible, so dried out that God can no longer use me. So what can we do intentionally? I said to our kids, I'm committed to being more adaptable, and can you help me be more adaptable? Well, sometimes they remind me of that. Here's some things that I've found actually helpful to be adaptable. And we're going to send you each of these, but the first one is to do a life decades exercise. In other words, you define the decades of your life using one or two or three words. And the way that this was designed by Bob Buford was that you begin with the current decade you're in. You describe that decade with two or three words and roughly how you're investing your time. And then you go backwards in your life a decade and describe it all the way down to your teen years. But then the power of the exercise is going forward. What do you want the next decade to be characterized by in two or three words? And the following one. And then pretty soon you're into your 80s, or if you're courageous, your 90s. Now, what it does is it gives you a trajectory for your life. What are the implications for today if I want to be this person 10 years from now and this person 20 years from now? But also, it gives you a tripping mechanism. Now, I am this will be the third decade in my life that I've used this exercise that Bob Buford insisted on me doing, because when I came up on my 60s, I knew I was moving from a decade of replicating myself in my 50s to really a legacy of people doing what I've been doing, but doing it in their own way with their own kind of impact. And it was a trip mechanism. How will I change? It's forced me to stop at my 59th year and think about the implications of my 60s and my 70s, because I had written it out and it was there staring back at me. So we encourage you to do that. Another important exercise for being adaptable or resilient perhaps is the discipline of silent retreat days. If you are going to continue to adapt your life, you have to stop long enough to observe your life, to see what's working and not working, and to listen carefully to your own heart and to God about what goes next. How will you adapt your life in the middle of this decade? And so both Doug and I have silent days that we do. I do 3 days a year that are separate. Some people take longer periods, some take shorter. It's an ancient discipline. But what it does is it forces you to stop and think about how do you need to adapt to what's changed, what's working, what's not working. So Doug, we've done a silent retreat together in Pinehurst, South Carolina, I believe. What are your observations from that discipline? How does that give you the ability to adapt?
I think verses kind of come alive that maybe you'd never considered before. I can still recall actually being in that home. I think everybody had left and gone somewhere else, and I had picked a room there in front of a fire and was. There were some specific verses that came to mind that I've never forgotten, and I continue to contemplate them because they spoke to me at that moment, and I think continue to guide me going forward. So I highly recommend them. Actually, our roundtable is trying to schedule one now because we'd like to get back together again and do a silent retreat together. We found so much value in it.
Yeah, and it seems like an oxymoron, a silent retreat with your friends or your halftime cohort. But, the only time that I think you and I talked, we had maybe 8 people at that, was at the meals. And then we had a chance to process what we were hearing, what the implications were. And I think at the end of that time, we both wrote down what we had learned in 2 or 3 words. And that will help you course correct. It's about adaptability. Another important discipline that's very easy to implement into your life that will absolutely is guaranteed to make you more adaptable as you get older is an annual roadmap update. Now, you may not think this is important, but I can guarantee you if you do this one simple step, it will take you a long way down the road to being adaptable over the coming decades. And that is to go to your calendar, your electronic calendar, and create a reoccurring calendar appointment early in December that happens every single year for the rest of your life. It's a reoccurring annual calendar event for 60 minutes or 90 minutes. Take your Excel roadmap and drag it into that calendar and just label the calendar appointment, update my roadmap, and share it with my friends and family. And if you just take an hour or 90 minutes every single year early in December, when you've got time between American Thanksgiving and Christmas, let's say, to go to your roadmap and update it, you will find, and then share it with a few people and ask them for feedback, you will find that it absolutely changes your ability to adapt. I do this every year. I've done it for many years. It's probably the single most important thing I do. So here's the questions. Again, we're going to send these to you, but here are the questions I ask myself is my personal mission statement still clear, and is it still true? Is this still my purpose? Remember, the most important thing of the 5 big factors for finishing well from our observation is to know your calling and stay focused on it. And then I ask myself, do my perfect life metrics reflect the life I most want to live? And then am I living in alignment with those? If you're married, I ask yourself, is my spouse's dream really becoming true? To what degree am I helping him or her live out their calling and live the life they most are longing for? And then, in your roadmap, there are 5 big action areas. So I always ask myself these questions. How have I done in these 5 action areas? What can come off now? The most important list to make in this season of life is a stop doing list, not a to-do list. And then what new areas do I need to grow in or focus in this coming year? And how would I like to re-rank these action areas going forward? And then I share my roadmap and I get feedback from them. So that's the skills or the disciplines that Doug and I see about being adaptable. Now, the last 2 factors about finishing well that we've learned are the number 4th one is to put your family and your marriage, your spouse's interest ahead of your own, and be focused on helping them thrive. I can't tell you how many people I've coached who have been taken right out of the game, distracted from their calling because they didn't pay attention to their marriage and their family. And as you get older, if you have children and they get married, you start having more people in your family. Our family has doubled over the last 5 years. And so it takes even more time on your calendar to focus on the well-being of those that you love around you. If you're single, who are the people in your extended family that you want to really invest in? Who are the people around you that are your chosen family? And what do you need to be doing in order to help them thrive? And then the 5th area, and we'll stop with this, is their health. Yeah, as I went through that list of people I've coached in the past just a day or 2 ago, I realized that many of the people on the list are no longer focused on living out their calling because they didn't pay enough attention to their health. And it caught up with them, either that it made them unable to travel or that it diminishes their energy. And so the questions I have are, what are your disciplines to the degree it is in your ability to take really good care of your health? For me, some of those big factors are sleep, number 1. Do I track my sleep? Do I know the quality of my sleep? And that's a detailed thing. You can read some great books on it. I have a system to track it. How do you track your sleep? Exercise, obviously, steps a day. Those are things you can measure. Nutrition, I stick to I've chosen a body weight that I feel is in my own best interest. I weigh myself every day. I stick to that body weight. And then stress, so silence and solitude is an important piece, or meditation, prayer. It's a part of taking my mind and reorienting it to who's in control, that God is my provider, and to diminish the stress I feel in life from things I can't control that God is in control of. Important things like getting a cardio CTA scan or a cardio calcium scan so that I know for sure if I have blockages in my body. These are all things that are not just about trying to look good at 60 years old, but more importantly, trying to stay in the game and finish well as best I can. So let's stop there, Doug. What are last thoughts that you have, and how would you kind of wrap this up in your life?
Well, first of all, thank you for pulling this all together. These are just fantastic and very reassuring, and give us perspective as we go forward. As now we approach a whole new year. In my particular case, I think I refer to them as filters, things that I use to make decisions. Because we're constantly making small decisions that take us to our goal. Interesting an observation or a comment you made that actually I didn't internalize until my wife said it. She said, we could keep doing this until we're in our 80s. And I thought, wow, that's actually quite powerful. What things can we do into our 80s? Because at my age now, that's an important factor, because what I could do in my 40s, I probably couldn't do into my 80s. The other thing is, the other filter I use is family. And when you make decisions constantly, I had a conflict coming up, and it was a family conflict versus opportunity conflict. Makes it an easy decision. If you've already decided that family has priority, then you don't wrestle with the decision. You might not like it, but you don't wrestle with it. So, Lloyd, what have you seen, again, as we bring this to a close, and we've all observed people that just are having great second halves, and then those that are not?
Well, it's funny because last week I spent some time with an old friend named Rich Stearns, who was the CEO of Parker Games, and then CEO of Lennox China, and he got to halftime in his life and felt called to leave his career. Not everybody is called to leave business or whatever your profession has been. Most of us can live out our calling in a platform like a business, but he felt called to leave and become the CEO of World Vision. And so he moved his family from Bucks County, Pennsylvania to Seattle, and gave up all the perks of the big stone home. If you know Bucks County outside of Philadelphia, his home was built in the 1700s, and 11 bedrooms and 5 acres of land, and felt called to give that up to go serve the poorest of the poor. And over the last 20 years, he has led an organization with really 49,000 staff around the world, $2 billion budget. I remember once we were doing an event together, and he told me that every day when his feet hit the ground, it's part of his responsibility for his team to raise $3.5 million every day. And he went on to say that includes Saturday and Sundays. And what he was sharing with me was the burden of millions and millions of little boys and girls that are depending on them for clean water, sanitation, hygiene, nutrition, education. And he's gone through seasons when his staff were abducted and kidnapped. He's gone through seasons when some of his staff in violent countries were killed. He's gone through seasons when he spent 5 years trying to convince the American church that they should respond to the AIDS crisis. And they were trying to just ignore it as if it would go away. And he told me stories of persisting even when his team told him, look, we've done research, our donors don't want to talk about the AIDS epidemic. And he stuck with it, and he persisted because he knew it was his calling. And then secondly, he surrounded himself with stories of little boys and girls whose lives he was changing. And he told me that, as a World Vision staffer, you're not supposed to have a favorite child that you've adopted. You're supposed to be interested in all the children out there, particularly the ones who haven't yet been cared for. And he said he and his wife Renee broke the rules by falling in love with one little girl that they've tracked with and funded directly all the way from elementary school through university into her job. And in his mind, her story is the source of encouragement that kept him going for 20 years. Getting up every day, putting one foot in front of the other, even when you're fighting the odds of the grinding brutality of poverty around the world. And I just was so inspired by his story and by his commitment, and having watched him live it out over those years. That's what I want in my life, is I want to instill in my life those things that will keep me focused on my calling, and so that it fits on a t-shirt, that I'm continually surrounded by sources of encouragement on purpose, that I become more and more adaptable as I get older rather than grumpy old man stuck in my ways. I stay focused on helping Linda and our family thrive, and I put it ahead of all the other things in my life that are compelling and impactful that I'm drawn to. And then number 5, to the best of my ability, I stay focused on my health and wellness. It's not that I can control what disease may come upon me in years to come, but I'm doing the disciplines every day that are important for me to get the sleep, nutrition, exercise, and the assessment of my body, so that I know that I'm living it, I'm stewarding it to be able to stay in this game as long as possible, so that I can watch the impact compound. It's like Jesus said, some soil, when they heard the word, they listened to it and put it into practice, and some produced 30, some 60, some 100-fold. Imagine in your life and in mine, if you can gain a line of sight to how your life will produce 100 times impact, so that every week and every day and every year you invest your life in a way that produces 100 units of blessing in other people's lives.
Wow, Rich turned quite a corner. He was worried about board games and China, and now he's making a difference in world hunger. Wow. Lloyd, that was awesome. And we've got several questions, but what do you think about going to the poll first?
Sure. Sounds great.
All right. So our poll is very clear. So the question was, which one of these is hurting you the most in the pursuit of your calling? And so the question was, I struggle with clearly knowing my calling, has the most votes, 57%. And second to that, with 29%, is insufficient sources of encouragement to come along beside me to encourage and help me in my pursuit of the calling. So I think clearly the large part of our audience, at least that responded to the poll, is knowing my calling. Can you give any suggestions on identifying that?
Yeah, no, that's a big topic, right, Doug? So we could spend, and we have done webinars on that. So I think that's the best way, is to really dig deep into that topic with one of our webinars on finding your calling. But the bottom line is to take the time to get clear on who you are and the work you've been given. So that's from Galatians 6, verse 4 and 5. Who you are is your strengths, your passions, your purpose statement, and the work you've been given is, what are the needs, what's going on in the world right now that's addressing those needs that you feel passionate about, and then where could you plug in? So the way we like to think about it at the Halftime Institute, as you know, since you're all alumni, is you get clear, you get free, and you get going. You get clear on your core, your strengths, your passions. You get free of the things that are good but not great, that are cluttering up your calendar and using up your finances and your emotional energy. And then you get going in an organization and a role that fits you, and you test it. You use a low-cost probe to test it out. So we've got lots of great tools. If you've been through halftime and you're not clear yet on your calling, don't get despaired. Don't get discouraged by that. We can help you with one-on-one coaching. We can help you with what we call a halftime refresh, which is a simple 4-part journey with peers where we help you go back and retool and refine and refresh your strategy for the next season of your life.
Well, great. We were transitioned then to the questions. Looks like we got 3 questions there, Lloyd. I will read the first one. Barry asks, when do you know you're there?
Yeah, so this is a kind of convergence of faith and action, because knowing your calling is, if God just sent you an email that was very, very clear, wouldn't that be helpful? Wouldn't that make it so much easier? And yet he says in the Bible, I will guide you with my eye. So it's about eye contact with God if you're following him. So part of this journey is a little bit nebulous, of listening to God and testing out the things that you're called to that you're drawn to. The other part is very practical. Like I said earlier, sitting and listening to your peers that have worked with you describe your strength and your biggest contribution in the company for the last 30 years, perhaps. Doing the Strength Finder assessment, really a careful assessment of what you're passionate about. We have a process with 300 or 400 photos that helps you distill down the images that most captivate your heart. And then testing it out, working systematically towards creating paper scenarios on paper, creating low-cost probes where you go and try something for a short while, and you keep finding your way through to clarity. So the one question of when you're there is when you're there in terms of your purpose, clarity around your purpose. You might say, well, when are you there in terms of the effort level? Well, I love that in Matthew 11:28, that Jesus said, hey, walk with me and work with me. I will teach you the unforced rhythms of grace. I'll teach you the unforced rhythms of grace. So how you know you're there in terms of the amount of effort you've got is to walk with him, and learn the unforced rhythms of grace. He says, if my yoke is easy, it's not, and my burden is light. So this is not about, wearing yourself out. That's why we're talking about persistence. And then in terms of longevity, how do I know I'm there? Well, I'm probably going to go through seasons. I've been sticking with this now for 25 years, but that's not particularly long-term when you think about the scope of history or someone's life. So I probably at 61, I probably have, my family's lived to their 80s and 90s. So I probably have 25, maybe 30 years, and 20 or 25 of those should be productive years. So, but your role changes. You go from warrior to king to sage in life. And in those latter years, you release and direct the energy of others. You don't supply the energy anymore. And so I envision my role changing. I envision the amount of time I spend on my calling going down as the family needs go up and our family grows. But I don't envision myself dabbling in my purpose. I don't envision myself becoming enamored with the leisure myth. And I certainly don't aspire to that. But, how will we know we're there? I'm drawn to the note that Bob Buford got from Peter Drucker, where he said at age 93, he felt like the last 11 years of his life were the most productive. To me, that's more inspiring than just kind of squandering some of my time in the next season. So I think there's several parts of knowing you're there. One is around clarity, another is around effort level, and another is around longevity. And that's probably different for everybody.
Barry, that was a good question. We've got 2 more that are also pretty good, Lloyd. So what about persistent prayer?
Yeah, well, I think, when we talk about the ability to adaptability, that's where prayer is so important. If you look at Jesus' life again, he had a clear purpose statement and he had a strategy to execute on it, but you see him every day getting up and and going on his knees and praying in the sense of really looking for direction. So I think the two ways that persistent prayer enables you to stay in the game are, number one, the wisdom to redirect your path, and number two, the strength. You know, is the Bible says, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness." And so there are these times when I bring my strengths to something, but they're never enough to live out what I'm called to do, and I have to ask God for the strength to do that. Very often for me, it's relational. I'm introverted, so I gain energy being alone. I need large amounts of cave time. So I have to ask the Lord to give me the emotional energy to do what I'm called to do. And that's part of my persistence.
And Lloyd, our last question is there a difference between persistence and determination?
Well, I think persistence is determination that you stick with. You know, you can have determination to reach a short-term goal. And, you know, I remember as a gymnast, the determination it took to learn how to do an iron cross or to do a handstand on the rings when they're moving around and you're trying to find balance in the middle of space with these, two rings in your hands. And that took persistence, but that took determination. But persistence would be if I could still do an iron cross on the rings today. Now, I think there are probably 61-year-old people that could and can, but I didn't persist with it. I was determined to be the best gymnast I could be, but I didn't persist. Whereas this is different. I'm determined to know and live out my calling, but I want to be determined to do that over the long haul of my life. So I think persistence is determination over the long haul.
Well, that is all our questions, Lloyd. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for doing it. What a great topic. Is there
and
go ahead.
We remind people that we'll send them the link, that we're always looking for helping our alumni with questions that come up, particularly around a topic like this. If you came through halftime 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, we want to help you persist. So reach out to us. Just click one of those buttons. You can click Contact Lloyd, and we will get back to you, and we'll get you what you need, and we'll connect you with others, and we'll find ways to encourage you. We're going to help you persist if you reach out to us, if that would be useful to you.
And we're right at the top of the hour. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Lloyd, thank you for doing this. I look forward to our next event next month. Bye-bye.
You bet.